I'm going to make this a short show because clearly I cannot talk today. So this is going to be a super short show. I'm going to do this and we're going to get going. When you come across the news media, oftentimes they want more, a summary, a snappy story. They aren't interested in the nuance of the article. And so it will often focus on a few of the big findings. They won't talk about the more subtle things inside. And if you are interested in learning more about where their information came from, then a great place to look would be inside the article. And we have here an example. We looked up a Canadian study on giving money to homeless people and to then watch how they spent it and see what happened to their economics. And in this case here, you can see like Vox is a very well-sourced outlet. They do a very good job of making sure that they link that kind of stuff so that people can go investigate it for themselves. So here they have the study, they have the funder as well, and down here they have the results. So the results on it, this is a very well organized page on their methodology, how they obtained the data, who participated in it. This is like a model of the kinds of questions that you should be asking when you go through a piece of research. How did they collect the data? Who participated? Who funded it? Has it been peer reviewed? And what were the results? Or pretty much what you want to look for here. And the nice thing about this is that they pre-screen out like all of the talk that is important to scientists, but not necessarily of use to the public. They want to let you know the most impactful results here in this situation. And so this is a really user-friendly public consumption of science format of presenting their results. Now, another example here we looked at were other research on cash transfers. This is a meta-analysis where they brought together several studies. And again, you kind of want to know what were the questions that were being asked, how were the studies conducted, who participated, who funded it, and what were the results. And as you can see here, like they were able to conclude that despite the stereotypes, recipients of cash do not systematically waste or misuse it. And they have here, this article reviews 19 studies on average cash transfers that have a significant negative effect on total expenditures on temptation goods, that being alcohol, tobacco, and etc. This negative result is supported by data from Latin America, Africa, and Asia for both conditional and unconditional cash transfer programs. Now we're starting to get into that more cumbersome burden, like clunky language that scientists like to use. But this is depends on the level you want to go at, right? If you have something that you just need a general overview for, a Washington Post article, a New York Times article, professional journalistic outlets will link their sources. So let's just put study Washington Post, right? If you're on Twitter, here we go. Here's a Washington Post one. Study finds cognitive bias in how medical examiners evaluate child deaths. And then the first thing, a new study that they link in here, it's coming from the Journal of Forensic Science. Now this is probably going to be more of a proper journal article. Let's talk about just proper journal articles next. But for the moment, let's look at, again, what the news article tries to do. It gives you the link to the study and basically gives you some of the summary, maybe a bit more about the people doing it or what drove the research than you'll ever get in the sort of in the journal articles themselves. And what a good newspaper article should do is again be a filter, or not a filter in terms of like keeping you away from things, but a sorting filter in terms of what is important for the public to know in order to understand this research, and what is important conversations for scientists to have but really won't impact public understanding. So here we've got a case where of the 133 medical examiners who participated in the study, 78 said they could not determine a manner of death from the information, so they did an experiment. We'll talk about modes of analysis soon. Among the 55 who could, 23 concluded the child's death was an accident, 32 determined it was a homicide. And going on to then elaborate the problem, if reliability is one of the key criteria in the Supreme Court has said judges should consider in deciding whether or not to allow expert testimony. And here they're saying these professionals, when presented with the same facts, did not produce a consistent decision in terms of what the manner of death would be. And we know that reliability, like if you have a medicine, you want to know in advance what it is going to do to you, right? And any drug could, in theory, have a reaction at any time, but we want to know generally that things are consistent across populations, age groups, whatever, dietary habits, and that we can predict it as pretty well. So if you don't want to get deep into a study, you can at least read through the newspaper, and then I would say, go ahead and you can look at the original study too. As much as there are some good writers out there who can do a good job interpreting those kinds of scientific results for a general public, if you want to know from the horse's mouth, it depends on how much you want to know about the study, how much you're worried, like how much its validity is important to you. If you're looking at like 7 different let's say election polls, right? You've got a bunch of different samples here to work with. So any one poll could be wrong, but given the overall trend of the others 5 or 6, you can make a conclusion on a pattern. If it's a single study that's the first time or the only time anyone has looked at this one thing, well, then that's going to carry a lot of weight if you want to make claims about the general world. And let's move on to that. What is the purpose of research? Purpose of research is threefold, as I mentioned in my notes on the philosophy of social science, and also I lifted entirely from my PhD supervisor, David Sanders, that the first thing is to describe the world. Describe things that haven't been described before. And you think, oh my gosh, the world is like, there's nothing left to describe. Well, like, Marx was the first person to really look at class the way he did. Olson's logic of collective action was the first person who looked at the world in the way he did. Kimberly Crenshaw looked at the world through the lens of the justice system and legal procedure and saw intersectionality, a concept that we all recognize, but no one gave a definition to and articulated a structure for understanding how different characteristics interact. So describing the world is pretty important, because if you don't first notice something, you can't understand it. So the first thing is to notice it. Once you notice it or describe it, then you want to understand, how did it come to be this way? And that's the next kind of investigations we can do, which is, why do things happen? What's the causality here? Why do we have X instead of Y? Why do we have Y instead of Z? Why do we have Z instead of... So all of those questions can be pulled apart or picked out to better understand how we arrived at where we did. And then that leads us on to the third one, normative analysis. What ought to be? And I think the phrase there is, normative analysis is looking with a goal of, how do we make things better, or how do we make better things happen? Maybe it's about delivery of a thing, and we want to improve the delivery or widen the delivery or make it more accessible or something, right? So that's one option of normative analysis. The other thing is, you might want to have better things happen, like no torture or no people going hungry. How can you get to a place where we can redistribute our food resources in a way that's equitable and people can have access to it? Not only is it there, but they can physically access it or economically afford it. These are very different questions. Therefore, the purpose of a study can be, one, to describe a phenomenon, either a new phenomenon or maybe something else but happening in a new context. It can be to explain why things happen or try to understand. It might not explain, but it will try to understand why things happen. And then thirdly, you can use studies to find out ways or investigate ways to make better things happen or to make things happen in a better way. Once you've got that done and you know which category of thing you want to know, if you're looking for a description of the world, the kinds of metrics you'll use to evaluate it will be different from if you're looking for causality. Causality is far harder to do accurately than just describing what you see. that we can get other people to describe and also agree upon. And of course, the normative thing assumes a shared audience of people who want that thing as well. Right? Therefore, if you are looking at a normative analysis for why the patriarchy should exist, I kind of don't care how great your methodology is. I disagree with the ends to which you are applying the scientific method. Okay. Having mentioned the scientific method, let's move on to discuss how that should inform the way that you look at these studies. Generally, if a piece has been published in an academic peer-reviewed journal, and it's a reputable one, not this sort of predatory online, there's been 3 years of publications and lots of, dodgy titles and stuff. Knowing the reliability of the journal is also informative. It's not determinative, but it will help inform you as to the rigor by which the peer review process was conducted. Those studies in peer review articles will be scientific. Absolutely will be they'll be based on the scientific method. There will be some sort of, if it's deductive, they will have a theory that they want to test. They will have a specific question based on that theory that they want to go into the world and answer. Because you can't just be like, how do we solve COVID? It has to be far more specific. Specific is terrific in science. So it might be given its genetic familial links with other versions of the SARS family, does the COVID-19 virus respond to this particular treatment on this particular spike? I don't know. I'm not a medical doctor, but the point of those kinds of studies is that they can be very, very specific, and you have to be published in a journal. So you've got your scientific method, you have your theory, you have some kind of research question. What am I looking at here? What are my hypotheses? And a hypothesis is a really important step, oftentimes that gets overlooked, I think, in the construction of scientific articles, because people are more interested in the methods and the results, and they sort of assume everyone agrees on what the hypotheses are. But I think personally it's very important to explain what would the world look like, if your theory were wrong, and what evidence is required for us to know when your results are actually representative of the rest of the world. In the natural sciences, the medical sciences, how should I say this? The natural sciences, they don't have as much possibility for variation in their dependent in the thing they want to study. Right? If a comet is moving at a certain speed and it is interacting with something else, it's not going to just decide to go home. It's not going to get sick and not show up to vote. It's not going to have a crisis of childcare, right? It is acted upon by forces beyond its control, over which it's just at the mercy of gravity or whatever else. And therefore the natural sciences don't have as much, they don't have as much room for not room for error, but they don't have to worry so much about error. If they find error, like a big variation, they try to replicate something and they get a completely different result, they will first question their methodology. They will first go back and go, did I do this right? Rather than saying, Eureka, I've got this new amazing study. I've got this new amazing result that nobody's ever got before. They might go, maybe the problem's me. Let me just double check. In the social sciences, we're trying to predict people. And even within medicine, the variation in chemistry is something that I'm sure is a challenge for people who do pharmaceutical and pharmacological research. And therefore, like when we do hypotheses, again, it's very clarifying to know what should we be looking for in the results to know that we think this is really happening in the world. Then, so your research question, your theory, your research question, your hypotheses, what do you think the world would look like if your theory was right? You want to know about the data set. And the data set can also be the people, the research subjects. That will affect the results profoundly. A good example of this is a political compass. most of the political compass questions do not come from the World Values Survey. The World Values Survey does make a conscious effort to look at the assumptions and things about language in their questions to make them more transferable, regardless of whether it's a developing country or a southern country or a northern hemisphere country, or what language people speak or their cultural backgrounds. Most of that study, though, comes from very Western perspectives, and oftentimes it seemed a bit biased toward American politics. And if you try to plot a European respondent on an American political scale, they're just going to look incredibly left-wing, whereas in their own context, they might be sort of center-left or even quite centrist in their views. Therefore, the social sciences, you've just got a bit more room for variation in the outcomes, because people's psychologies are more complicated than predicting the path of a comment or trying to calculate out gravitational waves or something. Those are difficult questions, but they are capable of being consistently answered to show that you are on the right track. Whereas social sciences, we're always following a moving target. You've got the data, you've got the analysis, and then you have the results. The results of the study are obviously the conclusions, and those will be able to be generalized to a bigger audience, depending on how the study was constructed. If you have a study that was made up of juveniles between the ages of 12 and 16, and you were looking at propensity to use online material, social media or something on the weekends, what are kids doing on the weekends with their free time? Are they sitting on the phone, or are they actually getting outside? I'm making this up, right? I don't know if the study exists, but let's say for the purposes of it, we did. If we had learned that over a cohort study where they went back to the same kids every 3 years, and that, I'm again making this up, online activity on the weekends increased 30%. In that time period, we could not say everyone in America has seen an increase in their social media use on the weekends by 30%, because the sample was limited to 14 to 16-year-olds, or what they were at that time, I guess, 11 to whatever year olds. And that's also an important caveat. Studies that, for instance, and this is very common, studies that have only used cis male subjects. Well, you can make a step and say women's bodies and trans people's bodies are not are just like that, but we know they're not. Are they close enough? Like, are the variations here actually relevant to the performance of the drug? Dunno. We know it works for one group, and that's kind of the danger, I think, of just taking studies that are drawn from one specific segment and saying, oh yeah, this is just going to work for everyone. I think there are some questions for a long time about the usefulness or the danger to pregnant people of taking these vaccines, because they didn't test them in the thing, because they go, oh, it's complicated, whatever. We hope it's okay, but there's a reasonableness. You just can't you can't treat the entire population as your data set, because that's expensive and the study would never end. So at some point you have to put a cap on it, which is usually determined by your budget more than anything. Ready, daddy. Oh yeah. I did watch a little bit of Kevin's thing last night. It was pretty funny. Okay, so we've got a bit. Let's just cover what we've covered, right? We talked a bit about doing online research. We talked about the drawbacks and benefits of looking at it from a newspaper point of view and general public articles about scientific studies where the author of the piece tries to act as a mediary between the scientific data, chatter, blah, 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 and what people actually, how normal, non-scientific people talk about things and understand the world. And we saw that if we go to reputable news organizations, we can get links either to the findings of the studies that have been already, again, prepared for us as members of the general public to translate the scientific notations and language and citations into something that is less intimidating, more immediately accessible, and also relevant to our lives. We want to, in these cases, also examine other things about the study to make sure it's adhering to the scientific method, that it is looking at a specific theory of the case. What is it? What's the research question? How did they go about translating it from an idea into an actual study? Who participated? And what were their findings? And who funded it? Again, important. So let's take it up. Okay, next thing is, let's, I don't want to do this one because this is really a depressing one. So let's look at a different study. Boop, 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 boop. All right, let's look at the studies they used here. This is another way that you can tell is whether or not they provide their sources. This is huge one, if people are willing to provide their sources, it gives me more confidence if they link them, because then I know if I need to go look at it and they're wrong, I can just see it. So if you're really interested in a piece and you want to go beyond the newspaper article, you are also maybe a little bit suspicious of the journalist not giving you the full picture, let's say, or maybe making it sound a bit more sensational. You want to know, you don't want the filter. You don't want the filter of the journalist. You want to go right to the original data set, or not data set, the original article. Right. Now, at this point, things might get a little more difficult, depending upon where the journal article is published. The first problem with getting access, or the first problem when trying to deal with scientific articles is actually just getting access. Things are getting a lot better. Open source publishing and the expectation that the public should be able to access taxpayer-funded research with no additional cost to a private company via the journals they publish in is becoming more and more of the norm. Open science is a trend I support and encourage strongly. Let's go ahead and, for instance, see what they give us here with this is adapted. This chart here is adapted from, looks like this looks like a journal article. Anytime you see "at all," you can tell that's going to be a proper journal article. And in this case, read the research. Here is the briefing paper. Full report, annexes to the report, annotated by, woof. Okay, wow. This is really, really interesting. Okay. This goes way above and beyond what a normal, this is a normal journal article will do. Normal journal articles will not include a briefing paper. A briefing paper is an excellent idea for the staff of electeds who have to brief their boss on whether or not she should vote for this thing. And you can see already that this is not made for scientists. It's got brief paragraphs, it's got bullet points and artwork, it's got big caps, and it's got numbers that are broken down. So this is, again, the highlights of things by the looks of it. And yeah, that are really designed to lay it out. So let's look at the full paper. Full report document. I'm kind of, in some ways, thinking I'd rather just look at a journal article, because these kinds of think tank pieces don't normally go through the peer review process. At least maybe they do, but they're not it's not formalized in the same way as, let's say, something that had to actually go through it. Okay. No, I don't want to do this one anymore. I'm not going to do the, let's just do a, study 2021. Let's just, no, let's just, okay, let's do a science one. COVID one. For some reason, I've got This Is America. This is America. Boom, boom. Don't get you slipping up in my head. Right. Okay. Yeah, this actually is quite. This looks very typical. Okay. DOI is a something information. DOI, it's a permanent identifier. It tells you the permanent link of a piece of usually an internet book or article or some kind of digital object identifier. That's what it is. A DOI is a digital object identifier that is meant to be a like forever and ever location where you can find this one thing. Right. And this is pretty typical of the kinds of structure you will see in an academic journal article. By summary, they can also call that the abstract. An abstract, so abstracts, you're not really taught to, I don't think we're taught properly to write abstracts. Generally, an abstract is supposed to give you an overview of what the article does, but that's a very open thing to say. And what various authors decide to put in their abstracts doesn't always give you the best insight into the most important finding in their paper. I tend to repeat this often, so I'll say it again, but for my abstracts, I've over time developed my criteria of making sure within the abstract, the following questions are answered. What was my research question? In one sentence, what's the answer to that question? Two sentences at the most, but not more than two. An abstract is usually about 250 words maximum. Why should you believe me? In other words, what data and methods did I use to come to my conclusion? And why should you care? How does this impact your life? How does this impact our understanding of the world? How does this contribute new knowledge? How does this refute a long-held belief or a theory that people thought would be global but doesn't appear to have an effect in this instance? If an abstract can answer those questions about your paper, the paper you're about to read, you have a roadmap. You know exactly what this paper is going to talk to you about. And in addition, oftentimes abstracts are not behind paywalls, whereas the articles are behind paywalls. So having an abstract that really concisely articulates the results of your analysis, the most important result, will mean people who can't read the whole thing can still have access to at least that information through your abstract. This, I'm sure, will be an especially well-written piece because The Lancet is a highly regarded, highly respected, very difficult to get published in a medical journal, but it kind of, you can see, we'll look at a social science one too, and you'll notice that these structures of presenting information that has been developed through the scientific method is just going to be consistent all the way through. It's just absolutely going to be, the structure is going to be the same because the method is the same. So you get an abstract or a summary. Your introduction gives you the overall, it starts to set the stage for you a little bit. Methods tells you the exact approach statistically that they used to do their analysis. The results will review what happened, and a discussion will talk about the implications. So the presenting the results is different from talking about the implication of the results. The discussion of the results tells you what's inside the data set. Also, it might look at, well, there's this variable we should have controlled for, or this theory we wanted to test, and they will present what they think are the cogent or relevant parts of that data analysis, and then step back and go, okay, now knowing this, what can we conclude? They also here talk about data sharing, which is increasingly becoming a requirement for journal articles. We're through CESDA, one of the groups I work with is looking at surveying journal articles or journal editors in the social sciences to get a handle on their data sharing policies and what their plans are going forward for sharing the data on which they publish the findings. Let's have a quick look here. Background. Long-term health consequences of COVID-19 remain largely unclear. The aim of the study was to describe the long-term health consequences of patients with COVID-19 who've been discharged from the hospital and investigate the associated risk factors, in particular, disease severity. Beautiful. Mwah. Chef's kiss. It's answered basically, you now know everything that this article will contain. It is addressing the question, research question, about the health consequences of COVID-19 in the long term. Their aim was to describe descriptive statistics, the long-term health consequences, and investigate or look causally at the associated risk factors. What risk factors are associated with a variation in the outcomes? Beautiful. Okay. Now when you get into methods, if you haven't done statistics, this is where you're just going to have to go, it's magic, right? I remember very clearly in my master's year, reading political science articles from published journals for the first time, really, and being confronted with just formula I didn't recognize, tables with numbers, negative signs, positive signs, little asterisks running around, bolded, talking about p-values and t ratios, all kinds of things. And it was just like reading a foreign language. It was like hitting a section in Latin in a book and then just moving on. And unless you want to spend some time learning regression, generally these kinds of data will want to look for change over time or identify when one thing appears, another thing appears. And so they want to look for causal analyses when they do inferential statistics, not just describing reality. And for that, they also want control variables. So if you, let's say, you want to look at the how something is affected as people age, right, as you get older, and you don't take into account that people tend to make more money over the course of their lifetime, right? Like as you, the longer you're in the workforce, you get that kind of seniority, and so your next starting salary, tends to be higher than if you had just started out. And if you are older, maybe you get, more education, more chances for qualifications. And so you want to make sure that those kinds of things are in your model so that you can take out their effects and focus on your theoretical variables. This is where you're going to get some words that might throw you off a little bit. We did an ambidirectional cohort study of patients with confirmed COVID. Ambidirectional obviously means multiple directions, and cohort means a group of people. I'm not entirely sure what an ambidirectional cohort study is because I'm not in medicine, but we could look it up if we needed to. So how do they do the description part? They would be patients for whom follow-up would be difficult. Okay, those are able to move freely. All patients were interviewed with a series of questionnaire for evaluation of symptoms and health-related quality of life, underwent physical examinations and a 6-minute walking test, and received blood tests. Okay, so we now know the body of people. This is who they interviewed. The next part talked about their sampling procedure. So when you have a population, it might not be financially feasible to interview everybody. There's you can't do a census for everything, which means we have to take a sample. If we have to exclude some people and take other people, the question is, do the people we pick at random generally represent the people in the group? Are they like that sample? And if not, how do we make sure we get enough people to get it pretty close to the sample is a microcosm of the population? And here what they did was a stratified sampling procedure to sample patients according to their highest 7 category scale during their hospital stay. Stratified sampling means organizing people on by different categories and taking a little sample from each. Let me give you maybe a better example. If you want to do a study of a university with a lot of different departments. I know my glasses keep starting to fall apart. But let's say the business school has 40% of the students enrolled, and the English department has 5%, and the social studies department has, let's say, 25%, and the law school has another percentage, blah, 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 right? If you were to go into that university campus location and just start to pull students from random, you can't be sure that you're not, because the business school is half the population, unless you know that information and you ask which school they're enrolled in. You could, in theory, get 75% of the students being from the business school, which is great for the representativeness of the business school, but what about the English department? What about the law school? And so a stratified sample says, well, look, 40% of the student population is in the business school, 5% in the English department, 25% in social, whatever. You go, okay, let's organize this so that we sample in a way that 40% of the people we talk to are from the business school and 5% are from English. And that way you kind of, again, you're not doing pure random sampling, just blind picking people out of a crowd. You're sort of filtering people with the eye of, I want the overall sample to look like the campus sample on this metric. I don't really need to go in this kind of detail, but like for the show, but that's like how far statisticians or people who do surveys go. The question of, are we really representing reality, a group that we can put onto a wider population in terms of these patterns would fit, is the whole purpose of doing the science. So it's something people really focus on. Then they go through their findings. And a lot of times you can see here, they'll talk about things like these scales, IRQ 205, all kinds of stuff. Maybe you'll know what those things are. Maybe you won't. But this is where, again, if I don't know what these things are, I kind of have to rely on peer review to be the thing that says, hey, yeah, these people are doing this stuff appropriately. And in an article or a journal like The Lancet, I have a higher degree of confidence that they would have people who would review this who would know. This is a very clearly written interpretation. At 6 months after acute infection, COVID-19 survivors were mainly troubled with fatigue or muscle weakness, sleep difficulties, and anxiety or depression. And then they mention who funded it. This is just boom, boom, boom. I mean, this is just, here's let's say the full PDF. Full PDF are going to be a little scarier because, yeah, they're going to be written in super small font, and they're going to have all kinds of references and stuff. But in this case, you could actually go through and read through the statistical analysis if you wanted to. You could see their results, which they put up here. And the final thing I'll do for the show is talk a little bit about interpreting interpreting regression analysis. So I'm just gonna zoom this up a little bit here. Okay, these look like all the descriptive statistics. Yeah, these just seemed, so descriptive statistics, and I'm saying that because they're not looking at how much variation or anything like that is being explained. Again, 7-category scale. So distribution analysis. Yeah. Okay. I'm going to get out of the medical sciences, not my strong suit. And let's go look at, I don't even know, like, yeah, here. Right. Am I still on the, I was invited to be on the board of this, and then, like, it's just a name thing. They didn't actually make me do anything for it. So, yeah. All right, let's see. Again, articles, or not articles, glasses are falling apart. Let's look at ballots, bombs, and bullets, the effect of mass shooting and terrorist attacks on electoral behavior. That could be interesting. Putting electoral competition where it belongs, comparing vote-based measures of electoral competition. See, this is stuff that I go to conference and go, ooh, that sounds like a really good title. Oh, I can't tell which panel I want to go to. The tangled web, is cyber participation still predictive of offline civic engagement? Or do moms demand action on guns? I'm trying to slide over. Parenthood and gun policy attitudes. All right, this one looks like to be You see how this one looks like it's locked? I think this one is behind a paywall. So let's go for this one. Because there's also, it kind of confronts one approach in feminist theory is the motherhood effect, but of course then it doesn't really explain women or people like who don't have kids. Parenthood effect. Let's have a look. The idea that motherhood primes women to support stronger gun control policy permeates our contemporary politics. Absolutely true. Motherhood shapes views on a variety of issues, but the question remains whether mothers hold distinctive views on gun control policies relative to their non-parent peers. This is the kind of geek I am. This is an interesting question to me because we can see often, we have examples in a society where a group of mothers predominantly will use their position as mothers to stake a moral high ground on an issue. Mothers against drunk driving. Mad, right? Mothers against gun violence. There is something about they are very consciously drawing on that role in order to frame their activism. They are defining themselves as moms. People who support mothers against drunk driving are supporting mothers against drunk driving, not just drunk driving, anti-drunk driving legislation or policies, right? You're kind of buying into this, I'm standing behind mothers. So this is a very, good question. We draw in 2017 Pew Research Center data to explore the ways gender, parenthood, and race intersect to shape attitudes on gun policy in the post-Sandy Hook era, when gun violence has become prominently linked with schools and children, and during a time when the Black Lives Matter movement has drawn national attention to the relationship of gun violence and racial equality. I'm very excited about this article. This is going to be fascinating. All right, so, do they do the stuff? Do they do the stuff that I said in the abstract? Let's find out. What is the question? What is my answer? Why should you believe me? Why should you care? So we'll go after it. Most notably, we find that contemporary depictions of mothers as a distinctly pro-gun group constituency are largely inaccurate. I am not surprised by this. I am not at all surprised by this. The very real gender gap in gun policy and attitudes appears to be falsely attributed to motherhood rather than gender. I studied this is not news to me, but this will be news to some people. We also find the very little impact of parenthood for men. Finally, we generally fail to see much of a relationship between race, parenthood, and gun attitudes. Overall, despite common belief and media reporting to the contrary, the story is very much one where parenthood seems to play little role in gun policy attitudes. This won't surprise me at all because, again, the framing of an issue doesn't necessarily represent the reality of it. So again, I'm very excited about this article. Ask me to review this. No, that's fine. I can read it for free here happily. I said I was going to get going here, so this will be the last thing I do, and because of my terrible mess up at the start of the show where I'm going to have to delete now like the first 10 minutes. Okay. What is my question? The question remains whether mothers hold distinctive views on gun control policies relative to their non-parent peers. That is my question. What is my answer? Down here, generally, we fail to see much relationship between race, parenthood, and gun attitudes. Overall, despite common beliefs and media reporting, the story is very much where parenthood seems to play little role. Why should you believe me? Well, they're drawing on 2017 Pew Research Center data to explore this evidence. And why should you care? This is a little bit of a maybe harder question in terms of, let me say. Yeah, Mumsnet is a good example of that too. This is more about, we're getting, there's a media story out there that's wrong. It's not the most, life-changing, why should we care? This is, but this piece of knowledge helps us to understand the difference between the power of political discourse or political language that frames things in a way that is meant to manipulate us emotively. It's meant to frame these issues in terms of the suffering of mothers and the loss of mothers and the consequences of actions on families. In the first word, Mumsnet, mothers against drunk driving, mothers against gun violence, it doesn't necessarily reflect that moms are that different of a population. Right, we will just very briefly go over this, but you can see too that they do a very nice, again, a social science journal article mirrors identically a medical science journal article or a physics science journal article because they're all based on the scientific method. So you don't have to really be so worried about, oh, I don't know anything about quantum physics. Well, yeah, if you know a little bit about inferential statistics and you can read, there's a lot you can work out on your own. So we have our abstract or introduction, then we have the introduction is the background about gender and gun policy attitudes, motherhood and gun policy attitudes, fatherhood, race, gender, and parenthood. Then they have their methods. Then again, they present their analysis, which is different from the results section. They will do a lot of different models, I'm sure, and present a lot of different tables. Then the results kind of like put those results, like kind of interpret what, with all this data, all this information, what can we actually conclude when we examine it against our predictions or what our theory holds should be true. And then the discussion is, it's always about like what's next, or it contextualizes it not only in terms of the theory, but in terms of wider society or the field or the discipline or the implications for information going forward. All right, so they have here their introduction, which is where they give the background to it. They're going to outline the current, the extant literature, the existing literature, that and the findings. Then there's a long-term gender gap with, of course, it's a very cis-normative, binary, self-identified women supporting gun control more than men, especially in the United States. I know more about that than maybe anywhere else. And, it's Pew, so it would definitely be in the American context, because I don't think they ask these questions in other countries, because they don't have to so much. And they basically give you the background, like how much of a gender gap is there, and what else what are the theories? And feminist theory, there's very much like a motherhood effect idea out there. The problem is it's not empirically, like the idea that motherhood is somehow unique from fatherhood or so different from non-parenthood that it's going to make people's political beliefs so much different. It's just not, we think about it that way because we start from an assumption about motherhood, but when you actually try to evaluate how much impact it has on something that women already support, it's very difficult to say the actual act of getting pregnant and delivering a baby has this consistent effect on women despite their income, the age at which they gave birth, their political attitudes beforehand, their religiosity, all this, like just that one thing. It's actually not it's not easy to do that. Oh my god, I'm so excited! Look at this. They have their hypotheses. Oh, yay! Look at this. All right, I love this. Hypothesis 1: motherhood will be associated with a more liberal view on gun control policy. More liberal views, okay, I mean that's slightly imprecise language, but basically they're saying a positive coefficient. And the liberal motherhood effects will be most pronounced on gun control policies explicitly linked to children or schools. And that's an interesting way that they're able to, maybe the questions that were asked they were able to get that level of like nuance here. 2, motherhood would be associated with greater support. So in other words, a positive coefficient and statistically significant for gun rights over stricter laws. Relatedly, the interaction between motherhood and ideology, so they're going to use, I think here, an interaction effect, which is intersectionality, will be significant, indicating that motherhood has a distinctly conservatizing impact on conservative women. Then they go through the fatherhood thing. And then once they've laid out the existing relevant studies and the hypotheses derived from those theories in those published works, then we can move on to the data and the method of analysis. So here they're going to talk about, this is so well written, dependent variable. This study employs a number of items relating to gun policy attitudes as its dependent variable, the thing that you want to the thing that changes that you want to investigate. That's your dependent variable. And then it looks like they describe exactly how they picked their dependent variables, and what they look like. The Cronbach's alpha is a scale metric when you put together items to make sure that they're all hanging conceptually together. It's a level of analysis that, unless you've done it, you're just going to have to go, okay, I believe you. Then they also describe their independent variables, and the most important one for their theory, of course, is parenthood. But then there are a lot of other demographic variables that they also created because they didn't want to leave out something that was driving change and then have that change be distributed to the variables that were left in the model. So that's good scientific practice. And then finally, they present, well, not finally, they present their analyses. They discuss their results here. They've got a bivariate table, which is merely description, right? And that, here's the table. So it's just a crosstab of the various metrics. And here you can look at it to evaluate where things are yourself, right? And eyeball them. And then when they get to multivariate, this is when they're looking at causality. So the first thing they did was look at their descriptive statistics. The next thing they wanted to do was to control for things looking at other things. So this is the impact of parenthood on gun attitudes, a summary of regression results. And cell entries indicate whether results for parenthood dummy were statistically significant at the p equals less than 0.05 level, which is the most permissive amount of error in your results or data that you're allowed in the social sciences generally. Some studies I've seen people present on 0.10, but anyway, you can see here they've got like the table filled out. And more, and okay, all right, then sorry everyone. Oh, this is beautifully written. Oh, I'm slightly aroused at this article. It's so well done. They go through their first hypothesis. Okay, the first thing we predicted was this should happen, and then when it comes to the data, what happened? The results do not provide much support here. They go through their second one. The results also do not provide much support for our second hypothesis either. Third hypothesis predicted fatherhood would be associated with a conservative attitude on gun control policies. This hypothesis is predominantly unsupported. Hypothesis 4, black mothers would be particularly liberal on gun policy compared to their white counterparts. They did an interaction term to try to capture variation that was specifically caused by the intersectionality of being black and a mother versus being white and a mother. The results do not support this hypothesis. The parenthood race interaction is not significant. In other words, it's not greater than just random chance. Yeah, I think basically self-identified. I don't know what people in the chat are talking about. All right, so after they kind of go, here's our hypothesis 1, 2, 3, and 4. This is what we found. Then there's a discussion. Step back. Do moms demand liberal action on guns? No. In multivariate models, on a variety of broad measures of gun policies, attitudes, moms were overwhelmingly no different than women without children, even on policies specifically tied to homes with children in them. Moms had attitudes that were not significantly different from other women. Moreover, when interacting parental status with ideology, we found only one significant effect for women in terms of attitudes about guns, and it was in the opposite direction of what the theory predicted. So this, like these articles, if you get a chance to read them, oftentimes when you get beyond the difficult statistical terms, if you're not familiar with them, or the lists of, you know, sometimes I had to learn how to like block out like all of these, like this kind of stuff where it gets messy with all these kinds of names, and just blank them out and not see them unless I'm interested in a particular result. Discussion. And yeah, their conclusions. This is perfectly, like, well written, well conducted, well described piece of original academic research here. Disclosure statement, if this was the we're funding stuff, and no potential conflicts of interest was reported by the authors. Information on who wrote it, where they work, their backgrounds, and then various notes. Right now. So this was a multivariate analysis using ANOVA. No, here ANOVA is it's a test of difference, but when it's often used in psychology. ANOVA tests are really good when you have a very small sample size. You're dealing with experimental results, for instance, group 1, group 2, group 3. When you're doing, in this case, they were doing regression analyses. And a regression analysis isn't just a test of difference. It actually allows you to estimate the amount of explanation each coefficient, each variable provides to the overall prediction of the dependent variable. Here's what's the just. I wish they would. This isn't a great table. I'm not happy with this table. Normally they look more nightmarish than that. Let's see. Disclosure statement. Let's see, footnotes. Anything else? I'm not super happy with. It's the one thing I would say is I want to see the coefficients as opposed to just the yes/no thing. But so bivariate results were. Let me see what they did. In order to summarize, they didn't. Okay, they did multiple. They did several different types of regression models. So close. I don't know. Is regression a form of an ANOVA test? Let me just check. I don't think it is, but because ANOVA just means analysis of variance. ANOVA can be considered as a case of linear regression. Oh, okay. So if anything, regression is a higher order thing, in which all predictors are categorical, as opposed. Okay, all right. Types of levels of data here. There's starting to need a fluency with the terminology here. The difference that distinguishes linear regression from ANOVA is the way the results are reported in common statistical softwares. Let's see. All right, so from the mathematical point of view, linear regression and ANOVA are identical. Both break down the total variance of the data into different portions and verify the equality of these subvariances by means of a test, in this case an F test in the ANOVA. Oh, that's right, because there's always an ANOVA test in my SPS output, but because we always kind of superseded it with other results, I never really paid that much attention. What can be added is that both techniques, the dependent variable is a continuous one. All right, so the dependent variable has to have multiple categories on which people could possibly respond. But in the ANOVA test analysis, the independent variable can be exclusively categorical, while in regression, it could be both categorical or continuous independent variables. Thus, ANOVA can be considered as a case of linear regression in which all predictors are categorical. The difference that distinguishes linear regression from ANOVA is the way the results are reported in common statistical analyses, and then they go on. So yes, there is a relationship here, but no. So are they saying the hypotheses are wrong? Yes, the hypotheses are framed in such a way that if you do not, all right, so. Going back to Popper and the idea of falsifiability, this is, I think, there's a lot of ways you can find truth in the world, like correspondence theory, all this stuff. Ask Gary Edwards. But I think the one that distinguishes science from non-science is the idea of falsification. Like, I do qualitative analysis and I do descriptive analysis of my data, but I'm not doing inferential statistics. And I think inferential statistics require a prediction of what the world should look like if your theory were at work, and what the world and the default is no effect. The null hypothesis is ultimately no effect. If I hypothesize that if I raise my right hand every day at 5 a.m. the sun will come up, the assumption is if I don't do it, the null hypothesis here is that I make no difference to the sun coming up. And that's what you would want to test is, do I have an impact on the sun? And so in this case, when they say our hypothesis predicts that these specific measures, like here, fatherhood will be associated with distinctly conservative attitudes, what they're saying is the coefficient for this particular result needs to be on, let's say it's from conservative to liberal, or conservative, no, yet liberal. So basically you can tell the difference. Whatever is the more conservative end of that response, men should be there more than women. There should be some kind of negative association. Not negative isn't bad, but like, let's say conservative to more progressive. If there's no effect, the hypothesis is just wrong. So here's the thing. Women who are mothers or people, well, in this case, you can't say people who are mothers because I think that they kind of like made it into a binary. In our societies, we think about it politically in that way, that motherhood is kind of lifted up and given a bit more weight. But women's attitudes are not determined by whether or not they have kids, is what they're finding. So in this case, the hypotheses for all of these were wrong, insofar as we're not able to make a measurable estimate of the impact of these discrete modes of being on results in a predictable way. Every single mother will react in the same way. Every single father will react in the same way. We can't say that. Now, again, that's different from how we think about it. We can think about it normatively, about the role that mothers play and their losses when their children are victims to violence or drunk driving. But if you just plucked out a woman, 3 women, and you ask them for their attitudes on stuff, there won't be enough of a difference between people's responses that you can predict who has kids and who doesn't. So they are saying this. So yeah, the predictions based on what common thinking or common sense, or collectively what's known as common sense, actually are not supported by empirical analysis. Okay. You guys are broken up. I was commenting on that study's demographic variable. I didn't read through all the independent variables, and I would be not at all surprised if Pew has self-identification, because it's probably coming from an internet panel. Even if you call people, you can ask about their ethnic background, but it's where they place themselves on the options that you give them. Yeah, and so that is sort of how you navigate through from seeing, a headline on, what is this headline again? A more recent study is, just go through, read it, look at who funded it, look at links to see if you can learn more about it, and ideally if you can get access to the original journal. Oftentimes you won't, though, because things are behind paywalls, and in which case I would say really look at the abstract. Oh, there's one other thing I can tell you, though. Academics are a little bit sneaky. Oftentimes they will put up versions of their articles. And oh God, what was the name of that article we did together? Women. Yeah, women's political interest. Okay. Right. Yeah. Okay. So let's take a look at this as a good example of how sometimes you can get around the paywall system. Here is an article that I published a long time ago. Yes, understanding men and women's political interest, evidence from a study of gendered political attitudes. Basically, what we found is that people's self-ranking on attributes traditionally associated with gender stereotypes was a better predictor of their political attitudes than their identified sex based on the binary we offered them. In this case, what is this? Notes? Anyway, it doesn't really matter. Yeah, you can't get the article because it's behind a paywall. And how much? I don't even know how much it would cost to get a hold of it. But yes, behind a paywall. But if you search the name of it, sometimes we find ways of just uploading our work to the internet without, like, it might be a draft version of it, or it might be the proofs copy of it. And so far, yes, if you actually wanted this, you could go ahead and download it and read it. And here you can see, now this is more of the kind of table that I had in mind. These are the sorts of things that, might be a little bit, if it starts to go over your head, then you just go to the results and the discussion section. So this was, or also I should mention, it's not just Rosie Campbell, Dave, why am I forgetting his last name? Basically did all of the confirmatory factor analysis for us because we didn't have access to the the software. Yes, so that is a 101 in ways that you can navigate information on the internet to better understand the data and the findings, and also with your level of comfort. And also a workaround that if you go to a study's actual link and it is behind a paywall, maybe go ahead and just search for it on the interworlds. So if there is a copy that just happens to be not behind a paywall, you can go ahead and have a look at that. All right, guys, I'm going to go. Like I said, I already screwed up this episode enough. I'm going to have to go cut all that out now. And I will be back later on today with my D&D game. So yeah, you guys be well. Next time we'll have to do something fun for my birthday. We will, okay. I guess what I'll do is I'll give 5 minutes. We'll have 5 minutes of Q&A. If people have any questions in the chat, go ahead and write those up now. So yeah, I will just sit here for a little bit in case there's any questions. Yeah, how you guys are doing? No, it's pretty quiet. Excellent. All right, cool. We'll do something less nerdy next time. And go practice. Go look up things online. Go click on some news articles about studies and have a read through, see whether or not you think they're any good. Okay, excellent. Everyone's saying bye. So cool. Hey! All right. Catch you guys here next week. I have been Kristi. You have been awesome. Stay happy, stay healthy, stay well wherever it is, whenever it is you are. And we will talk again after my birthday. So we'll see you guys later. Fascinating. Oh, you're such a nerd, Bruce. Like me. All right, guys. Have a good one. Bye.